Good evening, everybody. This is Al with Longoriahaus Dog Training. Hey, man, I've got a ton of questions that you guys have asked during the week, and I definitely want to bring a ton of value to you guys. So just need to check a couple of things, make sure that this is actually up. Let me go ahead and pull my page up and make sure that this is actually up and running. So, well, hey, thanks so much for watching tonight. I've got a ton of questions that I want to answer. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started with those questions here in just a second. But if you've never watched one of my live shows tonight, typically I have a few more people. We've got some people that are taking time off this week, and with the storms that were coming through Houston today, I gave some folks time off. Generally, the format for these live shows is you ask any type of dog training question that you might have, and I'm going to give you as detailed of an answer as I possibly can. So if you have any questions, make sure that you leave those down in the comment section below, and I will definitely be going over theirs. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the very first question that I have tonight. And this question came in, I believe, here on Facebook. So the question is, do you have any advice on how to build food or play drive in a dog that just doesn't seem to care about either one? I'm trying to do IGP. For those of you guys that don't know, IGP is a dog sport with him. I'm trying to do IGP with him, but he lacks drive in everything but bite work. You know, it can be pretty tough sometimes when you have a dog that doesn't necessarily have all the drive that you're wanting them to have. But I'm going to give you some tips and pointers that I think that might be useful. You know, the first thing that I think about anytime that we're struggling with a dog that doesn't have high food drive is make sure that there's some form of exercise that you're doing on a daily basis that's going to begin to trigger the dog's brain will trigger the dog's stomach to tell the brain that, hey, we need some calories. A lot of people that are trying to do sport as a hobby will do the sport, but they'll still be like bowl feeding and doing things like that. And what I really recommend for anybody that's wanting to compete in this very difficult dog sport is that you actually make your dog work for their kibble. Now, if you're trying to build toy drive, there are ways to be able to build toy drive for your dog, but I'm just going to tell you that it's been my experience with any of those dogs that we're shaping, how much that they're going to like, how much they like to play with a ball or something like that, that it's really never just going to happen. But really interesting, what I noticed in the question that I received is that your dog lacks drive in everything but bite work. And there's really the answer, okay? If you're able to teach your dog how to do the things that you want them to do, but they're coming alive for the protection work, then you need to figure out what specific thing it is about the protection work that they love, and then use that particular thing to create your obedience. Now, I'll tell you, I'm very lucky. Gabby, which is the dog that I'm using for IGP right now, she actually does a fantastic job of coming into drive on her own, and she loves everything. But I'm just going to share this with you that sometimes I'll go out onto the training field with a variety of different toys from occasion to occasion. So one time I'll take a ball, one time I'll take a tug, one time I'll take a sleeve, some other times I'll take food with me. So with her, I'm always taking something different. But with your specific dog, if you see that the dog is struggling but only really loves one thing, well, then bring just that one thing and make the dog do all the performance skills by associating the skill that you want to that particular type of game. If you have more questions about how to make this happen, I'd love to show you how to do that. But take the aspects of protection work and the bite work that your dog loves so much, and then begin to use those to be able to help your dog to understand how to associate. Oh, and just to repeat myself, make sure that you're working the dog for their kibble. There's so many great kibbles out there, maybe feeding raw, maybe feeding frozen Biljack. Those kinds of things can really help you to be able to bring the drive out on your dog. So, hey, good luck to you in the dog sport. It's a pretty competitive one. Hope you guys do well. Okay, so the next question that I have on the list that we received, this one actually came in through the Amazon Echo products. We have a skill there that if you ask questions to it, I end up getting them and then I answer them here on these live shows. So the question is, how do I get my dog to come reliably? Reliable recalls is one of those things that we all really need from our dogs. And many dog owners are constantly telling me that, hey, my dog is pretty good at coming, except, and so that, when I hear that except, that's the reliability portion, okay? And I really want to kind of demystify, like, what is it that actually produces a very reliable recall? Well, for starters, the very first thing that you're going to want to do to create a reliable recall is you need to practice every day with the dog. And it does need to be value-based. And what I do with my dogs is I actually start a game of recall with them when they're 8 weeks old, and I continue some version of that game every day for the rest of their life, whether it be throwing a piece of food and calling them back, whether it be playing fetch, whether it be sending them to something and calling them back. I'm always just trying to find ways to be able to call them back. But here's another thing that you need to consider, okay? You need to consider that if you really want a reliable recall, it really is about us being prepared to be able to communicate to the dog that even though that you see that distraction, which is very powerful to you, and you want that more than coming back to me, we will make you come back. And that really is the realm of your training collars, your long line, and your remote collar. Those kinds of tools can really help. So if you really want to start basic with building some reliability, what I would recommend doing is having a leash on your dog, getting out there whenever there are distractions, letting your dog begin to move away, call your dog's name, and then reel your dog back in using your long line and begin to reinforce that. But practicing on a daily basis and maintaining that throughout the life of the dog is really going to be the thing that's going to build your recall. Okay, and so hey guys, for those of y'all that are watching, hey, thanks so much for your attention. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys that's watching tonight. Okay, so far we've talked about dogs that have low drive and they're needing to do competitive dog obedience. We've also talked about the reliability of recalls, how to build into that. So the next one that I've got, the next question I have is this. My dog is extremely aggressive. How much do you charge for classes? It's really interesting. I get these types of questions on a pretty regular basis. And I'll tell you, the reason that I put the question up there is that whenever I stated the price to the person, I generally don't get any kind of response from people whenever they hear what the cost is. Having a very aggressive dog and having a dog trainer work with it is a lot of liability for us. We're putting ourselves on the line to be able to work with aggressive dogs. Now, I work with quite a few aggressive dogs. I'm not going to say that I work with the most aggressive dogs that I've ever seen, but I do see some pretty aggressive dogs. Like, here's the thing. If you have an aggressive dog, the cost for the training isn't going to be in the several $100s. It's probably going to be closer to $1,000 to $2,000, maybe even $3,000 for the type of training that you're going to need to go through for that dog. Just to kind of be blunt a little bit, or maybe to be clear on my process for this, over the years as we've been working these aggressive dogs and really been learning about how to help them, but also to protect ourselves, I'm absolutely in favor of remote collar training for the folks to learn how to use a remote collar and for the dog to undergo remote collar training, because that really seems to me to be changing their minds about these aggressive acts that they're doing, and then helping them to actually become a much calmer dog. Yes, there's a lot of other training tools out there, and positive reinforcement does have a lot to do with rehabilitating these dogs, but in keeping them safe, muzzle training and also remote collar training for these dogs is particularly important. I tell people this, and I tell my clients all the time, when a dog says that, hey, I'm going to come after you, human, and I'm going to basically hurt you in the worst way possible, having to change that kind of mindset in that instant when the dog is having that thought is not particularly nice. It actually has to be fairly firm for the dog to understand that a human you should not be aggressive towards humans, and definitely not being aggressive towards dogs. Now, there are techniques out there that I can't condone where a dog could actually get injured, but for these aggressive dogs, having a situation where they decide to become aggressive towards a dog or towards another person, and the dog fundamentally becoming uncomfortable, actually is a pretty big learning moment for the dog to establish a boundary that I just can't act the way that I've been acting. Now, this isn't the training that you're going to do for all dogs, and you shouldn't take this training lightly. If you don't know, if you have an aggressive dog and you're trying to do it yourself, it's probably best to enlist the help of a professional to be able to help you, if not to send your dog to a professional to do the rehabilitation for these aggressive dogs. But if you have an aggressive dog, the training for it is not inexpensive. It tends to be $1,000 or more because of everything that goes into it, the equipment, the time that the trainer has to spend, and so forth and so on. But if you have an aggressive dog, there is help. I'm definitely willing to come and help you with your aggressive dog if you happen to be struggling with that. All right, guys. So I've got some more questions on my list here. All right. So here's the next question. How do I teach my dog to walk calmly on a leash? Teaching your dog to walk calmly on a leash is one of those major skills that we really need our dogs to be able to do. And a lot of times there's so many different reasons why your dog is actually struggling on leash. But there's one surefire way that we have found that it's a little bit of a slow technique, but it is a great technique when you do it to be able to help your dog. And here it is. Here's a real simple technique to be able to get a dog to begin to learn how to walk on a slack leash. And that is by wearing the leash inside your home, and it is tethered to an adult. You know, if you begin to go through this process of tethering a dog to you and they're having to move with you, that tug of war that's going to go on between you and the dog inside the home is going to go a long way to actually setting the boundary of how much pulling is allowed, because you're going to respond to it. But there are obviously some other things that you can do. I can't tell you enough how valuable it is to actually have a dog that's going to come and be rewarded for being on the left-hand side of your body. If you're trying to get your dog to actually move together with you and you're teaching it to sit in front of you and you've never actually taught your dog to actually sit on the left-hand side of your body, then that's one of the things that's going to make it a little bit more difficult for you. Spending a fair amount of time, several weeks actually, showing your dog the importance of being on your left-hand side while also using your leash and tethering your dog to the inside of your home when you're inside your home is a winning combination for many, many families. One thing that does hurt leash walking that a lot of people do is they first get their puppy and they try to take their dog on a leash and collar to go for walks all over the neighborhood, and they're really not focused on getting the dog to move together with them. They're more focused on actually going around the block. Now, I don't want to downplay that. That's actually not a bad idea, but I would prefer, if you're trying to socialize your dog and show it the neighborhood, then maybe putting your dog in a harness and allowing it to pull, as opposed to having a collar on the dog and allowing it to pull, because that's really going to make it more difficult for you when you actually want to go about having the leash being nice and slack with you and your dog. Well, hey, for all you guys that are watching, I really appreciate each and every one of y'all that are watching the show tonight. If you haven't already, it would mean so much to me if you just say hi so I can see who it is that's watching. I see that some of you guys are watching. All right, let me grab a quick sip of water here. Okay, so what's the next question on my list? So what's the best way to train any dog? Well, it's a good question. What is the best way to train the dog? Should you train the dog with a remote collar? Should you use a clicker? Should you use treats? Should you use dog food? How about hand signals? How about voice commands? There's so many different ways to go about training a dog. And I'll tell you, the best way is the way that happens to work for you and your dog. Each dog is uniquely different. Each human is uniquely different. And finding the way to be able to work with the individual dog that's in front of you, that's really it. You gotta get in there. You gotta figure out, who is this dog that is in front of me? Who are they? What do they love? What do they dislike? How do they respond to the leash? How do they respond to a harness? What toy is their favorite thing? Do they like this versus that? understanding your dog and spending time getting to know them is really how you're going to go about training any dog. Now, yes, there's a ton of different techniques that are out there to be able to teach your dog to do things. And what I recommend for anybody that's really looking to train their dog is, as you're finding out who they are, what their likes and what their dislikes are, that you begin to really focus on the three major skill areas. The three skills that I would first teach a dog is I would teach them how to stay on their place. I would also end up teaching a dog, how to walk on a slack leash and be on my left-hand side. And then I also teach the dog the importance of hearing their name and turning around and coming back. And these are things that I think everybody should be working with their dog on a daily and regular basis, because they're just such cornerstones and foundational pieces to train your dog. However, each dog is a little bit different. Some dogs we end up training. Some dogs we end up training with. Some dogs we end up training with one type of food. Other dogs we end up training with another type of food. So really getting in there and figuring out who the dog in front of you is the way that you're going to really know, is the way that you're really going to know how is it best to train your dog. Now, granted, one of the services that we offer as a dog training company is that when I lay eyes on your dog, I get to compare your dog to all the hundreds of other, if not thousands of other dogs that I've seen in my career. And I get to be like, okay, this is what's going to work for you. And then I pass that information along. And obviously there's a lot of value in that. And then it actually helps you begin to speed up the process. But getting in there and really knowing who your dog is the key to finding out what is the best way to train your dog, because they genuinely are individuals. All right, well, I see some of you guys. Okay, W.S. Johnson, hi, nice to see you. Sandy, nice to see you. Yes, and we are okay. We came through the storm just fine. It was actually, I heard some people lost power for several hours. And we only lost power, I think, for like a tenth of a second. The lights flickered, the internet went out. I was sad about that. The lights flickered, the internet went out, and then right after that, came back on. It thundered for a while, but really wasn't all that bad. So, but hey, thanks for all you guys that are watching us tonight. I still got several questions. I'd love to hear about what's going on with you and your dogs. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave those down in the comment section below. I'd love to be able to go over those things. So I've got several more questions. Let me just kind of see. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more questions on my list. So I definitely would like to get through those. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Good. Yeah, I got plenty of time. I've only been at this for 20 minutes. So yeah, and hey guys, for those of y'all that are joining us a little bit late, the live show actually was supposed to be on my YouTube channel tonight, but YouTube actually changed the way they actually allow people to live stream. So you actually have to have 1,000 subscribers. That's something that we're working on. But because I don't have 1,000 subscribers, they actually blocked me from being able to go live. So we jumped on over here to Facebook to be able to do the live show. So hey, thanks for each and every one of you guys for doing that. Hey, and if you don't mind, please be sure to hit that like button as you're watching the show. And if you could, it would mean so much to me if you would hit the share button and share this on your feed, so that way anybody else that's needing help with their dogs can come in, join us tonight, and to kind of get their questions answered. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next question. Okay, how do I get my dog to stop stealing food from my 4-year-old? Now, I've been dealing with this, these kinds of issues here for the past couple of months, where dogs are behaving badly and stealing food from children. And it really is a boundaries thing. When dogs are stealing stuff, that means that they're not really clear on where the boundary is, and if they are clear on the boundary is, then the consequence for crossing that boundary really is irrelevant to the dog. One of the things that I see with dogs and boundaries, and I see this with my own guys, is that whenever we set the boundaries, as our presence begins to wane and begins to go further and further away, then the dogs obviously begin to push those boundaries. So really getting a dog to stop stealing food from children is really finding one boundary, finding one place that you actually want your dog to be, having a very clear boundary around that place, and then really sticking to it. And what that means is that when your dog is there, I want you to make their place for them the most valuable place that the dog could be. Make it incredibly valuable. Now, that doesn't mean make it exciting, but you definitely want to deploy food. You want to deploy petting. You definitely want to bring the dog's favorite food to it whenever they're on their place. But then the other thing is you need to use your leash and your other training tools. When your dog makes a choice to come off those boundaries, the consequences need to be clear. They don't need to be overly firm, but they do need to be firm enough that the dog understands that you are to stay where I've asked you to until we've released. This is really an important thing, and it has to be a daily practice, because if your dog is beginning to steal food from children, it's really only a matter of time before something bad is going to happen. And the bad thing, and justifiably so, the bad thing that happens in our society is that dogs get blamed, and unfortunately they lose their lives whenever they end up hurting a child. So a dog should never hurt a child. But we should really be diligent enough that we're setting these good boundaries for the dogs, letting them know where we want them to be, bringing a lot of value for that, and then also teaching children to not tease dogs, that they need to respect the dogs whenever they're on their place, but really knowing your dog as well. If you're unsure about your dog, do some place training, keep a leash on that dog, and begin to practice on a daily basis, and your dog will reward you with great obedience if you go through that process. Okay, all right, so what's next on the list here, guys? So last one was, how do I get my dog to stop stealing food from my 4-year-old? And so next up on the list is, how do I teach my rescue dog the commands no and stop? So I'm going to tell you the way that I use the word no. So no is my general word that I use for you've made a mistake, okay? I also have a couple other words that I use to correct dogs. I'll use no, I'll also use the word hey, and I will also say stop. So as far as no is basically a blanket cue that I use to tell the dog that what you're doing at that moment isn't what I want you to do. Now, I'll be honest, I've been a little inconsistent with this since my dogs aren't puppies anymore. But when I do use no on dogs that are just starting training, it absolutely means that you are going to receive some form of positive punishment. And all that positive punishment means is that you're going to add something that will tell the dog that there is a boundary there, and it is firm, but not overtly firm. Okay, so it doesn't need to. When I associate no and teach no, I say no, and I generally follow that with some kind of leash pressure or possibly remote collar pressure if I was going to do that. Now, the word stop is a little bit more serious for me when I teach a dog, and I only use the word stop at the boundaries where the dog would have access to a street that has cars. So at the front door, at the garage, and any of the side gates that are leaving my yard. I have two gates on the side of my home, and then I also have obviously my front door and the garage. So if I'm at those, what ends up happening with the dog, the way that I prefer to teach it, is I keep my leash very slack, and then when the dog crosses the boundary of the door, I say the word stop, and then I like to use the remote collar at a higher level to tell them that there is a very firm boundary for crossing the door without permission. And we do this to keep the dog safe from running into the street. It is a pretty effective way to train a dog to not bolt out the front door. The problem that most people have with teaching the stop command is a lot of people like to give obedience commands like sit or stay prior to opening the door and setting the dog up for the stop situation. So that's one of the mistakes. And then the other mistake that people make, I just lost train of thought right there. Why the other mistake? The obedience is one. Oh yeah, here it is. So the other mistake that people make when they're teaching the stop command is that they actually have the leash very tight, preventing the dog from crossing the threshold. So you got to keep the leash slack, let the dog cross the threshold, and then on the other side of that, that's when it would go tight and firm until the dog came back into the threshold of the area you want them to be in. So I teach those two words. know and stop by associating them to different forms of positive punishment. Stop being the firmest one, and no being a more general way to be able to tell a dog that I didn't want it to do that. Okay, so next up, how do I teach my anxious mixed breed dog to become calm? Well, one thing that I've noticed that does not work with dogs that are anxious is offering them food. And there's a couple of reasons why. If we think about anxiety and the way that it works, anxiety really, when you're experiencing anxiety, any one of us is going to be dumping a ton of adrenaline into our bloodstream, okay? So if you're dumping adrenaline into your bloodstream, it actually makes it difficult for you to want to eat food, okay? So the first thing that you have to do with a dog, okay, that is anxious and nervous is you got to bring down the adrenaline levels. The easiest skill, again, and we use this for so many things, I'm such a big advocate for it, is place training, where we use the elevated bed and we're using a leash. When the dog actually begins to become anxious, you use your leash, you put them onto the place, relax the leash, and then you actually want the dog to come off the bed, off the place, so you can retighten the leash. It doesn't have to be firm, but it does need to go taut again, and continue to put the dog back on. Allow your anxious dog to come off so that way you can put them on for as long as you can possibly do that. And what I mean is, let's just say the dog comes off and comes off and comes off. Continue to be more patient and keep putting the dog back on. That effort that the dog is exerting is actually going to begin to help the dog come down. But what's also going to help the dog is the signal that you're using when you're using the leash. What the leash mechanism does is as the dog is on the bed and the leash goes relax, and then the dog crosses a boundary and it goes tight, and then back to relax and the dog gets back on, that mechanism of off and on actually sends calming signals to the dog's brain. So once you've actually seen the dog become calm and less anxious on the place, this is really where I begin to use petting, where I handle the dog. When I'm handling these dogs at first, I'm not going to go right into petting them. I'm going to lay my hand on their shoulder. So when I lay it on their shoulder and they're actually I can feel that the muscles are relaxing underneath my hand, that's where I'm going to put a pet. A lot of people with anxious dogs, the muscles are tight and they're really stroking the dog, building the anxiety. So really, with your anxious dog, use your leash first. Put your hand on the dog's shoulder once you've seen the dog begin to come down, and then if you feel the muscles underneath your hand begin to relax, then you want to go ahead and use the petting to be able to help the dog to understand that this is the calmer place to be. Helping your dog have hope and become less anxious is the key by repeating this process on a daily basis for as many times as you can. The last step, and I failed to mention it, the last step is once you've brought your dog down, the anxiety down, the adrenaline level down, it's not a bad idea to begin to feed the dog in the down position as you're massaging their back. It's a really great way to produce calmness in a dog if you systematically go through using the leash, using your hand, following it with petting, and then eventually coming in and feeding the dog. Okay. Well, hey guys, if anybody has any questions, be sure to drop those down below. Would love to hear from you guys. So, all right. So what's next? All right. So the next question is, how can I get my dog to sit down? And I actually had this question just yesterday. Actually, I was with one of my clients, and we were talking to them about the differences in sitting. Hey Ziva, how you doing? Good to see you, man. So anyway, there's different, excuse me, there we go. Gotta drink a little bit more water. So there's actually differences in the way that a dog can sit. If you watch your dog sitting, you're gonna notice a couple of things, okay? When your dog sits, one of two things is probably gonna happen. Either the front feet are going to back up towards the back feet, or the front feet are going to stay in and the butt is going to swing forward. Whenever you see your dog using its front feet and going back to the hips, that is called a rock back sit. And then whenever you see the front feet stay underneath the chest and then the butt swings forward, that is called a tuck up sit. Okay, so those two are different. If you're considering doing any kind of competitive sport with your dog, you really want to avoid the rock back sit because it's going to cost you points whenever you're competing with your dog. So, okay, so how do you teach a sit? Well, the simplest way to teach a sit for me is by luring the dog. But I want to take this opportunity right now to clarify two terms that maybe you're not aware of. So having food in your hand could either be luring or baiting the dog. And I just want to tell you what I believe the difference is, or what I know to be the difference. When you're baiting a dog, that basically means that the dog can see the source of scent, being the piece of food that's in your hand. And when you're luring the dog, that means that there is no visible food or treat, that it's somehow hidden in your hand, and you're using a hand gesture to be able to get your dog to do the thing that you want. So if you're trying to teach your young puppy or your dog how to sit, my recommendation is to not bait your dog into the sit. And what I mean is, please do not put the food, the visible food, to the dog's nose where the dog can see it, and then raise the dog up. Now, if you're going to lure the dog, what I recommend is you want to lure by bringing the food to the nose and then raising it away from, so if this is the dog's nose, you want to raise it away from the dog's nose. And as you're raising it away, that's going to cause the dog to come forward to try to get the food. What a lot of people do is they bring the food here and then they raise it and then the dog goes back, and that's going to create that rock back sit that I told you just a moment ago. So when you're training the sit, bring the food to the dog's nose, raise it away so the dog will scoot up to try to get it, okay? That's one of the ways that you can actually train a sit. The other thing that I recommend is if you're teaching your dog to sit and they're in front of you, avoid giving the sit command in the beginning. Just reward the dog for doing the sit without you actually saying the word, and that's going to set you up for some clarity when you actually begin to teach the dog to sit on the left-hand side of your body. All right, guys, I'm going to do just a few more questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up for the evening. Okay. Yeah, you know, I thought this one was really, really interesting. So the question that I was asked is, do you think that dogs can tell time? I absolutely do. It's really interesting with my dogs. They absolutely know any day that it's Sunday morning, because this is when we're going to go out to practice protection dog stuff. And they absolutely know when it's mealtime. They know in the morning when I'm going to wake up. Now, I don't know that if they know the specific hour, minute and second, but the dogs absolutely have circadian rhythms that are telling them and helping them to understand, what's going on. I think a lot of creatures are actually very capable of telling time, and I don't think that a dog does not tell time, that they're just maybe oblivious to it. I think they really have a lot of awareness. And I mentioned this to a client the other day. I really feel that when you perceive our environments, that the ones that we're in, that a dog actually has a better ability to perceive the current environment, like the smells, the sights, the sounds. I think the human advantage for sure is that we can perceive color and we have a little bit more visual acuity, but I think a dog can pick up on motion, can hear more things, maybe they can taste more things, but heck, if you've ever tasted dog food, and I know that I have, if you've ever tasted dog food, maybe they don't taste so many great things because their food, quite honest, doesn't taste all that great. So anyway, but yeah, I definitely do feel that dogs can tell time because there's just so many indicators that they can do this. Hey, Andrea, glad you're joining in tonight. So I see you have a question. I forgot to ask you on Saturday, but how can I get Odin not to be so afraid of the vacuum and the broom? It goes back to a question that I answered just a few moments ago about anxiety. So he's anxious about these things, right? The first thing that I do with any dog that's kind of suffering with anxiety is I like to make the thing that they're afraid of a little bit more common. So like when it comes to like the vacuum, right? I generally would probably leave the vacuum in the room, and then I would just begin to train my dog using my leash, using my food, and then doing all the things that I want to do to show the dog that when this thing is present, you don't have anything to worry about. Now, I've seen some dogs that really get stressed out over it. But Andrew, what I also want you to do is I want you to use your place training when your dog is doing this. I think the place training really is the best way to show the dog to not worry about it. Now, it's not going to be a one-day fix, but it will be something that you want to acclimate the dog to over the course of a couple of weeks. Just remember one thing that I mentioned to you yesterday is that when you're in the environment and if something new comes into the environment and your response to it is a fear response, you're really surprised by it and it maybe makes you stop moving and get very expressive, your dog could possibly look at you, it's very likely, and that he's going to decide what he's going to do based on the way that you're also handling it. So I'd encourage you that when those things come out, to make sure that you're very neutral and also helping him to understand that, hey, being in the presence of this is going to help you get the rewards you want. I would avoid feeding in the beginning, Andrea. I would try to use my leash, do a lot of the calm petting for him to help him understand, but definitely don't hide those things. And then for sure, you don't want to threaten him with it. The first time that if your dog is, on their bed, don't just bring the vacuum right up to the bed, and see if he'll stay on there. Be smart. Make sure you keep a good gap between the vacuum and the bed and the broom, but also helping him to understand that he does have to stay there and that you are going to reward him for that. So, hey, good question there. I hope that's helpful for you. All right. So let me find one more. So, okay, I think I'm going to take this one last because I thought this was kind of funny. What does it mean when my dog stares at me for 4 straight hours? It means it's time for you to get up, okay? Stop sitting on the couch. If your dog is just straight set looking at you for 4 hours and you're not asleep in your bed, your dog is probably wanting to do something fun instead of you just laying there or sitting there, scrolling on social media or whatever it is that we do as humans for fun. But hey, dogs are really interested in us. They've been watching us for a long time. They've been together. We've been together with them for good thousands of years, 10,000, I don't know, maybe even 20,000 years. The two species have been together, and man, we really don't have a better friend. But if your dog is staring at you for 4 hours, you need to move around a little bit and maybe take your dog out for a walk. Would be a good thing. Would be a really good thing to do. So here, let me see if I can get a dog in the picture. Gabby, come here. Here she comes. Let's see if I can get her in the frame. Come here, hop, 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 hop. There's Gabby. Come here, Gabby. Oh, you're a good dog. All right, guys. Y'all have a great night, and we'll see y'all later. Take care.